grab a seat. There are many free seats left. My name is Myrna Arsaños. I'm the program director here, and it is an immense pleasure tonight to welcome Alexis Almeida and Lara Mimosa Montes. Welcome to both of you. Yeah, I've been dreaming about this reading, so I'm very, very excited for it. Alexis is going to read first. Matt Longobuco is going to introduce her, and then Lara will read. A few announcements before we begin. This Wednesday, we have an event titled Networks of Value, organized in conjunction with PALFest. And it is an event that looks at refusal in the literary field, how to organize writers and publishers against genocide. So looking at different strategies such as boycott, and how to take boycott a step further, and thinking out loud with people who have been engaged with these kinds of questions. So Noura Nan is going to be here. I'm just going to share who the guests are. Alessandra Bastagli, Hannah Black, Ismail Ibrahim, Benjamin Krusling, and Abdeljawad Omar is going to send us a video from Palestine. And they're all going to be contributing original text to this event, and then going to have a conversation. So please join us if you're around on Wednesday. And on Friday, we have Ricardo Bracco and Andrew Dermijian, who an event organized by our curator in residence, Ethan Philbrick. Okay, I think that's it for this week. And I will just now turn it over to Matt, who will introduce Alexis.
Thanks, Marin. Hi, everyone. It's my pleasure and honor to introduce Alexis tonight. She and I are both only children, so if you feel like one or both of us is your indispensable friend, it's good to know we're doing our jobs. When I was first meeting her as a person and a poet, she used to tell me that she was obsessed with certain writers, Edouard Levé and Hervé Guibert, Alejandro Pizarnik, Roberto Bolaño, René Gladman. I was like, is she looking in my bag when I get up to visit the bar? But no, I was just discovering one of our many affinities. Soon I would find out that her own work expresses what animates those artists as well. A discipline of absorption, an abiding faith in the power of metonymy to summon landscapes and lives from impressionistic shards of the daily, a sense of interior depth and weather whose effect on the possibility of interpersonal relationships doesn't necessarily spell doom, but definitely leaves a lot in question. In fact, that's a translator's question, and some of the best translators I know, and definitely Alexis among them, have a visceral feel for the gulfs between people, which can paradoxically draw us closer, and a respect for the slippage or trajectories between tenses, and a high sensitivity to the parallel universes that are so near to our own that they cause interference and glitching in the experiences we're trying to memorize or just hold on to. It's like the space between the items on the lists and catalogs she makes, or inside the poems she writes that are often about the poem or book she almost wrote or would have written or wrote as someone else. I read the manuscript of Alexis's forthcoming book, Caetano, while a storm was raging outside my window. It fit the poem's restless mood, the hunger to be swept up they describe. The words obsessed and obsession come up over and over. And Alexis suggests that she might slip away one day into one of those parallel worlds. She makes many claims about what she might do or has done or has never done. And to follow her is to appreciate the sometimes almost ineffable distinctions between the fulfilled, the inevitable, the ongoing, the possible, and often, for better or worse, the foreclosed. To say she has never climbed a scaffold, after all, is of a different order than to say she's never climbed a fence without climbing down the other side, which is different than saying she will never look past all these fields in her mind. The daunting thing about the fields in the mind is how vast they are. To chart their lakes and shores and childhood ruins is part of the labor of poems that seem to descend to another level of existence, sometimes with excitement or exhaustion, or a desire to gather beauty, or a fear of who might stagger out of the fog, contagious with madness. The poems investigate what we can never put on our to-do lists, that which is too ephemeral or distracting or secreted inside the body where language can't go, as in a series of poems that trace a pregnancy and end with a son. I'm obsessed with her poems of love, friendship, family, dreams, and the intricate architecture of sentences. Please welcome my indispensable friend, Alexis Almeida, to the Poetry Project.
Thank you so much, Matt. Thank you all for being here. This is like a dream reading. So amazing to read with Lara. Thank you, Miren, for the invite. I'm going to put on my timer. I don't think I've ever read this long, so. And thank you to my friends who helped me choose out my shirt for tonight. Okay. I'm just going to dive in. These are all poems from Caetano, my forthcoming book. Can everybody hear me? It's good? Okay. And then I'm going to end with something new. Okay. What is music? You are as beautiful as 6 almonds and 1 naked foot. On the sidewalk, I buy you soap made of coconut, snowflakes to cool you. A man walks by laughing. Is there a limit to this line? We wander around. There is a switch in the sun. You enter and leave it. A kid on the corner screams more. There is the question of what we do together. How will we make enough time? How will we carry all the bags? Who will keep the door open? How could the train go any slower? Who will water the spider plants? Who will remember the names of the eider ducks and the ox? Who will put their hands against the grate of a radiator? Who will protect the young? Who will hold a bowl over the body to bathe it? Who will swim across the canal? Who will chop the broccoli? Who will hear the crickets sing? Who will sense the rain coming? Who will walk down the same hallway over and over? Who will breathe into their own hands? Who will feel the earth move? Who will shake the empty box? Who will see the sentence lighting up? Improvisatory notes for making a necklace for your son. Here is the beginning feeling, the feeling of the beginning. Here is the memory in blue, the green-blue sequence, the morning, the fresh memory of these paintings. Here is the drawing of a green monster on the wall with yellow nails, the monster next to it not filled in with black eyes, and the line in the wall that looks like a wolf's mouth. You're just seeing it now, and maybe you also sensed it there last night. You saw it again this morning while you listened to your boyfriend's dream. Something about pizza figured greatly and makes you feel hungry now, while you're alone upstairs, here in this somehow not oppressive heat in Maine, where you can breathe and write this poem. Here's the sensation of plunging down into a bowl of beads, the strange shape of the shell as it passes through your fingers and gets quickly lost, the one that says A and the one that says M. You can't feel that, actually, though it does spell something in your hand, and then it doesn't. The sequence of colors is both arbitrary and intuitive. Your hand is passing quickly through them. Whatever you're looking for is here. You just have to find it. Here is the star that goes in the middle and the shell that goes next to it, the one you saw on the stairs last night, and the ones in the container in the kitchen with remnants of clams. Here's the pink and purple plastic beads he'll bite through in his sleep, and the pockets the piece will end up in. Here are the Swiss Alps in a photograph, the sun, jean shorts, a hiking pole. Here's the wish you made in the park by the highway, the $7 coffee you're still drinking, the Portland Press Herald, a quilt. Here's the space for love, the freckled arm and sunglasses, the thin thread and loose knot you make from it, the 7 beads, the monarch t-shirt, whatever you wear it to, what follows. I'm gonna adjust a little bit. Okay. Cohen told me to make a list of places I want to go. I saw a covered car and returned to a picture. There is a long, flat hill with some lines cut out.
The flowers were there, the lake wasn't. I still saw it. I touched her love and felt brave. Fell asleep on this train, rushed to see Canada before love dies. It seems I should move, go forward, but what is this heat? Defeat can be sweet. Press 12 ears of corn to my hands to make cake. I could eat raspberries and say, I love you. I have a son now. He has a giraffe that flies. Walk around with us and you might see a cattail spin or a stone open. It's the way I've learned to listen, how I am. The scratching is actually a bird singing. The singing is a bush I might sleep inside. In a dream, I can see through you all the way to the southern coast of Spain. Is projection language? What is energy? What's the difference between a poem and a dream? You can write all over one, and when no one's looking, the other still goes on. Some firsts. I took away certain kinds of things I do, all the innuendo, the reluctant moving beyond the most difficult part of the scene to whatever exists beyond language without power, just to leave something opening in the sentence. Let it be there, whoever I am in the narrative, thinking while writing, while I wait. And then desire does possess me. I continue the conversation with ghosts when I'm alone. I had to sit down, and everyone I love sees me from a distance in a dream. The sounds and the ones that move me. I turn the music on low. My son, the little knight, banging against my landlord's floor. Below my grandfather's face in the folder on the shelf. The scene of the family and whatever breaks it. Punishing brightness, the feeling of having to work. The impulse to infinitely photograph the moon. Leaving your life for one night. For you, I would become the sun. For a certain kind of dread, I would become a stone, such that in moving these beads across string, I name several people I love in the poem. Long fronds in the deep weeds and gossamer clots, losing myself in these new materials, long songs and breath, all these leaves moving to no distinct melody. Birth poem. In a dream, I was biking beside the ocean in the middle of a triathlon, mistaken for someone with stamina. In love with the feeling, I looked down and hoped no one would notice my body was falling off. I have never watched water completely unfreeze, but lichen is an indefinable mass so green I feel I can lick the world. Where have I driven? Providence is 17 hours away from my childhood home. Little waves trail off along the Taconic, and I catch my son, a fish, at the end of a bath. I will convince you, twisting my hand, that the object inside you is alive, and soon you'll see the pictures I have taken of ghosts, real voids. On a beach in Cape Cod, I whispered into my hands and put sand on my legs to keep warm. The ocean has a face inside what we call your belly, where you live. Polite people in the hospital tell me to push, and I thought I was, so blue in my limbs listening to your heart coming through a machine. Afraid of salt, I said please to a bucket, but breathing somehow survived. It doesn't mean it's not without pain, says my analyst, showing me I can clearly see the past. I remember a certain love like a small death, like sepia stains a photograph with nostalgia so distracting you have to look away. Here, said the ghost, steadying my shoulders in the hospital, and in your scream, I heard the rest of my life. And for a minute, everything leaned down to kill me, and now the cattails sing. Custody. It's Tuesday and I'm awake. The sun is winding across the grass, and my son comes home tomorrow. Is this going to be a sad poem? I'm tired, but never without him. Too much keeps happening between us. In these hours before work, you can hear something outside reality. A little starlight in a divot in the street where there used to be water, and beyond that, a secret wish. And beyond that, whatever resists language, like pain, and the ways my body habitually feels madness brush past it on its way down a hill into a diffuse void. I'm at work now just waiting, and I'm sorry I don't want to be here. Here's a song for that. A tree overhanging a lawn, making shadows that make noise, and a long road that bends, that ends. Some things I can't prove. Chris and I talk about love. We walk across the borough. When we eat together, we're family. The poem says something about June and the changing light at night. When you're gone, we'll talk all the time. However things turn out, love does revolutionize the way we move and speak. The radio turns on, and I suddenly lose my personal style. The summer feeling isn't gone, belongs. At night, Tina wants to be close. Eric wants to sleep. Everyone thinks they invented what they don't have, what they can't get from other people. My voice contains a voice of the past, the deep raspiness of childhood. Could I sing with this? Each effort to know you is so continuous, moving toward larger and larger rooms. It's so hot in the summer in New York, I willfully forget all these laws, the hole a name leaves, the law of the father, the law of the mother, the freedom of the child, those mystery buses and Ash's books, wherever they go. I name the feeling, and he's still separate from me. There's no solution, but I'll listen to it long into the night. I don't turn away. I become everyone. Okay. I'm going to read now from a long poem called Things I Have Made a Fiction. This book I wrote, or this, I guess it's a chapbook, but it's part of my longer book. I wrote it pretty much the year after Ash was born, when I just felt like I could not write again. So the ideas that I had for books were just enumerating in my mind, and they kind of became the book. Okay, Things I Have Made a Fiction. I wrote a book where I tried to make sense of my life, or where I tried to distinguish my life from my dreams, because in the moments just after waking, my dream life and my waking life were starting to feel confused. In the past few years, while I tried to write my dreams down, I would often do this as an effort not to lose them. But when I turned toward my waking life, it felt like certain things were still becoming lost, though maybe not in the same way. For example, when I turned toward my life, I felt the weight of something behind me in almost everything I did. Not just because I was beginning to move away from my dreams, but because there was a quality in my days that made moving feel different. There was an edge I had not anticipated when I walked. When I pulled a piece of bright fabric over my head, or when I went to visit a friend walking across the park, I thought these small gestures would never feel the same after the past 3 years. When I wrote down a dream in the morning, I was also writing down a question about the past, though the future was mostly where it landed. And when I thought of the future, I did not know where to look, so I sometimes closed my eyes. I thought in the small period of time it took to render the dream into writing, there was a horizon I could feel that made my body more awake. And through this, I could say things more freely, and that moved in many directions simultaneously. So when I said the words past or future, for example, they would in their trajectory often touch. I imagine other words here too, and the word first seemed to stick because it was funny. How does the original originate? How could something have been the first time? So in the book, I tried to remember them, like the first time I saw slow motion in a movie, which happened yesterday when someone described the first scene of L'Eclisse. And in trying not to lose these moments, I thought I could also direct a wish outward, and the pages came faster than they had in a while, and though I felt I should keep going until I had exhausted something, I also felt I was done. I wrote a book about pulling. What is a word when pulled from inside another word, or a sound when shaped from another sound? What is a story pulled from another one? What made the original seem less true? Where is a dream still pulling you in the morning? And why do people say pulling an espresso shot? What does it feel like to write a word that immediately invokes a force in you? What becomes locked when you pull? What shuts down after so much effort? If someone turns away, why does it pull you in? What is what pulls you to stay awake long into the night or toward the door in the morning? Are you pulling or waiting at the beginning of something's life? Have you ever been so afraid as when you didn't know which? It's a constant feeling like something tilting inside of you, like the walls of language disappearing as soon as you wake up. I wrote a book with 2 words on each page, the way Ben had been writing 2 words on clay platters, and my son had been fixated on the word 2, not wanting to go on to 3 while we pointed to images in his books he was trying to sound out. I had been reading the Vermont Notebook obsessively. I kept pointing to the images of shirts and beaches while I said them out loud. He would repeat them, but eventually wanted to include the 2 shirts or look at the other ash in the mirror, or the 2 rabbits that appeared behind a paper flap in his book in the shape of 1. There were 2 cows and 2 blankets and a 3rd big blanket, which he asked for before bed. I tried, but could not refer to it as the 3rd blanket, though that's what it had been in the room. I said, here's the other blanket before putting it over him, and he finally went to sleep. So he was teaching me how to speak. I wrote a book where I imagined I could talk to people I no longer talk to, and more so that all those people were in the same room. So when they appeared in this book like characters, they could say things as experiments, this being only the first scene, like, what would my uncle say to my boyfriend from college? Would I rush to pick up his coat from the floor when he dropped it? Where would his surfboard go? Would my friend who understood me to be a musician recognize me from outside an old photograph? Could I introduce her to a former Shakespeare professor whose class I barely attended? Could we laugh at the line, I do desire we may be better strangers, or eventually complain about our jobs? Would my grandfather speak Portuguese or Spanish to my grandmother? Would English no longer seem like a kind of idol? What secreted presence did the word English now hold? What would I say to a friend I thought I loved now that we had crossed through several gradations away from it? Would we resort to gossip or talking about back pain? What would we do with the blunt stillness between us now that it had been 2 years? I had been waking with language in my mouth as if I had been repeating it all night. But the book had started to move away from me. How could I gently remove myself? I no longer wanted to haunt it, so it could be written and rewritten several times. I wrote a book about waiting as a kind of being. Waiting as remembering something the way you wanted it to have been. Creating, then recreating the conditions for what you think you need over and over. Not unlike a child, imagining that that person will come, whoever you need to help or witness you for a certain period of time. That kind of longing you remember as early love. The person coming always in memory, though the person you're imagining isn't real like maybe this writing is real, though the feeling they're coming is, and goes on infinitely. I wrote a book about beginnings, so much courage at beginnings, where I could experience each thing I wrote at its start. So if I wanted to write about driving across the desert in New Mexico for several days, I could experience this desire across several pages in small imaginary bursts. And without actually getting to enjoy it, this would have meant the beginning was over. But the entire time I was writing, I felt there should also be another book, one that held all the things that were missing from this one, where things had to be finished and where they would become real. I wrote a book while driving up through California, where part of writing was feeling I was forgetting how to write, making small detours along the side of the road, feeling a bit tired but running into the ocean anyway, watching Ash rush toward the water and at a certain point having to hold him back, thinking I would have to remember this, that he was getting much stronger, scooping sand into a bucket repeatedly, then holding a paper-thin poppy to the window of the car and taking a picture, anticipating this memory and letting a sentence dissolve there. Then the other part, starting to remember what I hadn't done, trying not to, then panicking about what I hadn't written, turning away from the present scene, putting Ash to bed early and disappearing somewhere into the unwritten book, imagining the ways my body might turn as it moved toward the page, how it might move in and out of it, drape itself over a chair to write another body, reach backwards towards something it wanted, walk into the city with someone I love. I wrote a book about stopping. I had told a car to stop on the road when it cut in front of me, and Ash in the back seat asked, "Is Mama stopping?" And I said, "Yep, just briefly." And he said, "Do trees stop?" And Grandma stops, and ocean stop. He said, "Squirrels stop," and I said, "The Barclay Center stops, and rent stop." And he said, "Pickles stop, and birds stop." And it didn't matter who heard us saying this for hours, only that we kept saying it. Okay, so the last one in this series. I wrote a book about lines. I had been taking lines from Arthur Russell's Lucky Cloud and making them into a song for Ash to fall asleep to. Lucky cloud in your sky, a little rain, a lot of fun, there goes the sun. Reading lines from poems I loved and placing them at the center of my own poems in my mind, putting parentheses around phrases and lines and sentences as if to pull them out and into myself, carving a piece of wood into relief before inking it and saying, "This is not a sentence," feeling that, watching the fragment visually take shape, though also knowing that someone out there, maybe even me, would start to say this actually moved like a sentence too. Still, these lines continued to accumulate and swirl around as poems I thought would get done, and as they did become larger in their swirling and eventually did become written, they did also become my life. The line between me and the one I wanted to write became my life. It was more pronounced until it wasn't. And the line between me and some past version of myself became thin and broken without me noticing it. And the line in the painting between two colors became a third, much more beautiful color. And the line Ash kept drawing in the shades of yellow that he called a sunburn became my life. And the gradations of lines surrounding my lover's body and mine was all I could think of. I was scared I could not have both, or all of them, that I had to choose a line to live in for the time I lived in it and nothing else was there. And I made that assumption as I wrote, but felt I couldn't with the time I had, and I feared I didn't have the words, or the words would not be there when I was ready. And all this time my body kept moving without quite understanding where it was going, or that one day you would have written this or seen what you had seen. Okay, I'm just going to finish with the beginning of a story that I'm writing. I haven't written fiction in a long time, but Lara's book kind of inspired me. So yeah, this is just the way beginning of the story. Okay. You live on a street in a city surrounded by gray rivers, in a small apartment, in a room on the top floor, and you're telling a story, speaking it carefully as you write. You took part in the story you want to tell. You don't usually write what you think of as stories, but make lines or sentences that want to behave something like music. You think of yourself as a poet, and maybe the two are not always so different, but these particular sentences do move with a certain durational force, a sequential rhythm where they seem to want to take you somewhere, through a complete experience, seeing it through from beginning to end before starting again. This is not a story that will only be written that way, at least you tell yourself this at the beginning, but also push through different shapes, usually triangles of perception that need one another across the space of the book, where the characters inside it move in confused, resolute, and often opposing directions, shaping narrative time, or they're built into, seen through outward-facing spectacles of language, where things fly off them and it makes you want to catch them, though you know you can't fully. There's also a delight in losing these things too, the things being memories, the stuff that will propel the story because of some strange pacing they manage to inhabit, either slowing to a halt or speeding up beyond recognition. Still, there's something you keep wanting from all this, and it keeps you frozen in time. So the writing, will it move things around? Can the sentences reflect the problems or particulars of space made by the previous ones? Can they mark units of time that are both finished and continue to circulate through your life? What will happen then? There are three people in this story, J, H, and A. A, you believed at some point, is you at a different moment in your life, but of course writing this story makes you exist both inside of it and out. And now you believe you are everyone, or just simply outside it, differently alive. Right now you're thinking of Jay, standing still in a copper-colored coat with hoop earrings. When you think of Jay, you often see her in one particular moment, as if in a photograph. She's standing on the sidewalk with her phone in her hand near where you both live. But she has, of course, lived many lives since this story ends, as you have, and during the long gap in conversation where it begins again. You walk into your own apartment and drop your backpack on the floor, and the shades of exhaustion pull over you. This is the moment when you can remember everything with a frightening and immense acuity, and the moment, at least you can feel it, that the story most wants to be written, though your body feels least certain it can. So let's start there. How would you describe Jay? You find it very difficult. Maybe you need to do some studies in description. In this story, she's a dancer. She writes late at night, sometimes with her hands in the air. She runs from job to job. She moves things off tables and onto shelves after she puts her kid to bed, even when she worries she won't have the energy. She makes the impossible seem possible, which was something you admired about her. But what you're trying to get at in this story is the many-sidedness of love. In the story, you're walking alone in a museum. Someone has sent you to one of their favorite paintings. When you find it, you notice the way the leg of a woman sitting on the ground starts to blend in with the shore of the river, and the thick green brushstrokes of the grass behind her appear in the sky on the other side. The painting makes time fracture in several directions, but also keeps you nowhere but the present. This, you realize, is what this writing is also doing. It keeps you nowhere but alive, nowhere but the present. And this makes you feel Jay's absence, though the story is really about something more subtle, maybe something only you and her can understand. A is new. You feel the past lay down on your voice as you write this, with no choreography to guide you. She is new to many things here in the story, the city, her job, the way certain people operate, though within her own space there's much she knows very well. Her blue chair, the wolf lamp Antonia gave her, the way her table seems to curve with books, and the way she puts them into her lap with purpose before she carries them from room to room. H and her have gotten together just after she met Jay. Now they all know each other, but there's something strange about how she feels when H is around. The things he says are often displaced and uncertain. She locates this somewhere near the site where embarrassment meets pride. There's something ominous, too, about his character, and this writing wants to push H away for a time, though of course he'll find his way back in. There's something you have to ask first about the nature of love and language, which always, even in line form, has some quality of narrative, whether it reveals or keeps things hidden. And sometimes you have to back yourself into scenery before you return to get further in. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alexis. That was beautiful. There are also books for sale, a table over there. 2 books by Alexis and Lara's book as well. Translations by, what's the? Roberta Yanamico, exactly. Okay, so it is now my immense pleasure, and thank you, Matt, for a beautiful introduction. Thank you so much. Okay, it is my pleasure now to introduce Lara. Okay. It's Sunday. I text Lara, who is about to board a New York-bound flight. Send me your novel. I must have misplaced it. I read it before, multiple versions of it, but I need to see the words on the page, make sure I get it right. By right, I mean moving beyond familiar projections, truly getting the book for what it is. Although what the book is, in this case, disbands the verb entirely. Its solidity turned to slime, the subject narrator self, pulled into a porous triangulation, each category undergoing a transformation whereby real life, in an inverted Faustian bargain, is traded for a literary one. Someone in my kitchen is poaching a whole chicken. I haven't slept in 48 hours, paused emailing for an entire day in the hope of creating conditions for conversations that might stretch beyond social chatter. exchanges inclusive of silences like the one I had with Lara at Abrazo about a year ago in that little nook on the left side of the entrance next to the stacked coffee cups. The suffused blue light of that corner entirely attuned to our thought process. Or maybe it was the other way around, our thoughts becoming blue and low in frequency, soothing. I remember our exchange as effortless, the way children, when left alone, can grow an entirely novel society. Which is what Lara does. In her novel, she puts words to work elsewhere, toward an anti-utilitarian, pleasure-centered literary experience where time is divorced from the maintenance of social order. What draws me most to the time of the novel is precisely this contradiction. For the narrator to experience an, quote, uninterrupted interiority, end of quote, the messiness of life, its economic imperatives, drudgery, unpaid phone bills, must recede to the background, momentarily dissolve into thin air. In claiming its right to duration, the time of the novel is an enormous strike against, quote, the real. Labor must be withheld, and the demand is as follows. Literature must come to life. A cause the narrator espouses, quote, in solidarity with the narrators I like most, end of quote. Better conditions exist in prose, in its monastic life of practice and rigor, away from the wars of this other hopeless world. A part of me believed that literature's deep, gooey, subterranean time makes life more livable. Another part believes that to change our relationship to time, we must change the conditions of the world, and that these two categories of experience, writing and the world outside of it, yield in their antagonism a tremendously generative friction, that in fact one wouldn't exist without the other. In an interview with Wendy Xu, Lara mentions a comment I shared after reading an early draft of the book, in which I expressed a desire for clarity around the multiple terminologies it employs: narrator, subject, writer, and so on. She responded by saying that she didn't feel she had to answer the question herself, that her narrator could navigate the complexities of these terms on her own. If I love Lara's book, it's because it restores my faith in literature, its capacity to sense what it wants or needs, to search sentiently for forms that simultaneously emerge from and resist a world that interferes with its own making. But if it exists, Lara claims, literature must be alive. And I agree with her as much as I agree with her narrator. Please join me in welcoming Lara Mimosa Montes.
Thanks. I so wasn't ready. I was thinking, oh, we'll take a break and I'll go and kind of freshen up, you know, get in that headspace, but here I am. Thanks for the invite and the intro, Maren, Alexis. That was awesome. Thanks for coming. Trying to take stock of who's actually here. Who can I clock and then bitch out when I didn't see them? All right. Nice. Cool. Okay. So, I was listening to your intro, but I was also having to, multitask. Thanks. I was paying attention, but in my multitasking, I was also inspired. There's just everything to be inspired by. I'm going to start with 1-star Goodreads reviews of In Search of Lost Time by Marcel Proust. I did not even come close to finishing this interminable novel. I read the first volume in French and Swan's Way in English as part of my comp lit degree. I was sorry not to like someone who is considered a great French novelist, but I hated this almost as much as I did Ulysses. Recently, I read a book by Jane Smiley, 13 Ways of Looking at the Novel, which explained this book more concisely than my instructor managed to. Still don't like it, but understand it a bit better.
I made it halfway through volume 2. I'm just not that interested in the narrator, a sickly mama's boy with very first world problems. My mom didn't kiss me goodnight yet. I can't go to the opera tonight. The sculptures at this church are not as good as I hoped. So thrilling. Also, every sentence contains at least 5 subordinate clauses, something around 10 commas, and usually at least 1 semicolon. It takes forever to read, and very little happens. R.I.P. anyone who read 4,000 pages of this. There are so many books to read. If you can't get me interested by page 10, I'll move on. Guinness recognizes Remembrance of Things Past as the longest novel in the world, over 9.6 million characters. In my version, that equates to 3,165 pages. It took me around 100 hours, lost time. I will never get back. I have never been more relieved to finish a novel. The last 100 to 200 pages that contains the bits of genius and profound insight for the time when it was written doesn't do enough to make up for the immense part of inane chatter that the first 2,400 pages contain. No pude. There are very few books that I have not finished, this being one of them. Okay, well, poor guy. Tossing and turning for 20 or so pages. And just waits for his mom to kiss him on the forehead. Just because you can describe every single thought does not mean you have to put it in paper. I feel for the unfortunate French literature students who have to read all 4,000 pages of this. Awful, just awful. The book was for the January reading group. I read 100 pages and that was enough for me. Imposible, demasiado largo. I only read about 150 pages, then skipped to the 5th volume, and read another 50. I could not tolerate the impossible sentence structures that run on and on and on, nor the excruciating detail about every tiny thought of our experience. Did not finish, too deep for me. I'm gonna read the time of the novel. Thanks to Rachel and Ren and friends at Wendy's Subway. I'm so thrilled that you can buy copies tonight here. I'm happy to sign them. It's a novel or a novella. What do I want to say beyond that? Woman quits her day job as a bookseller to live in fiction. Okay. It was getting to be somewhat difficult managing my life as a person and my aspirations as a narrator. Becoming a narrator while still participating in the social was onerous, though not impossible, because by and large, I did not understand or enjoy the relatively inconsequential events and exchanges that could be said to constitute a life, neither others nor my own. "Stay, don't go," an acquaintance one day pleaded, grabbing me by the arm. "Oh, I like your sweater," another one blurted. "Can I touch it?" I felt the edges of my person become ragged and pixelated. As an adult, I experienced the touch of strangers as a permanent insult, but I also remember a time when as a young girl I would become foam in the MDMA-fueled embraces of those I did not know. Now I wanted to pilfer events, gestures, and perceptions from the real world and scramble them so that I could see them distorted anew, as I also wanted the words, their materiality, to give shape and form to what was more or less chaotic, infinite, and unquantifiable, my experience in the world. I was afraid to discover I had neither the skills nor the patience to accomplish what I had set out to do, become someone other than myself. Apart from securing the 2-bedroom off C Road, quitting my job, and ignoring my phone bill, I did not exactly think through the logistical details of my withdrawal. I suppose at the time my desire for something like exodus was so urgent that I could not be bothered. I wished to take leave of my situation and invent for myself a new errand. I imagined this journey would last only a short while, as long as a book. But I also knew that within that time, I would likely progress in a manner that periodically spun backward as it simultaneously jerked forward. In my spare time, I imagined living on the fringe, not of society, but of my life. And in doing so, I might vacate something prematurely, my dream of another life, or by choosing to enter the fiction, I was now inside the dream, inhabiting this semi-solid object, a jello mold made of words. To be carried into the language of the dream, was this not the promise of literature? I wished to be behind the curtain in back of house, to experience narrative as a series of misrecognitions, strange, irreproducible detours, and an amalgam of time and wonder. To enter the now of this writing, I would need to remove some part of the facade. I imagine my very face the cost. The more time I spent in this peripheral plane, the less interested I became in the everyday activities that I came to associate with the real, so that in order to defer it, I put in a special request at the post office that they hold my mail indefinitely because I did not know when I would return. The mail clerk unconcerned was of unusual good cheer. Bon voyage. I was apprehensive of large groups of people, any sum more than 3 gathering with or without a purpose. This is okay because it's more than 3. I agreed to attend a party as a courtesy, though I could not overlook the wealth that I seemed to be surrounded by at the board member's house after the opening. I wanted to say thank you, but I didn't know who to, so I asked the bartender for a glass of ice. Y nada más, no solo hielo. I asked for ice because in truth I did not remember in that moment how to ask for wine. I also desperately wished to feel less alone, but I knew it was time to go when I could no longer differentiate the voice of the one speaking from the ones that surrounded me. What a lovely purse. Oh, and such a beautiful corsage. Please have some punch. The effort to keep these channels separate, the real from the written, was creating in me a vacuum. Whereas I understood my desire to become a narrator was distinct from my desire to become a writer, I experienced some difficulty describing this to others, and so out of some hapless frustration or deep desire to prematurely end the conversation before it had even started, I conceded to repeating this terrible lie, that I was a writer, and when asked what I was writing, I would, gravitating further and further away from the real, carelessly reply, a book. Oh, a book. A novel. Is it fiction? Was I to blame for the situation I had created? I had heard of this phenomenon before, that a person might seek to confirm whether a novel was indeed fiction. What I preferred about the novel is the possibility of a form that subsumes all, but there is no word in English that encompasses everything in the simultaneous and paradoxical way implied by the gravitas of literature, without also invoking this deeply entrenched psychological burden of either or. No, I love you. I didn't mean that. Take it back. In America, most people believe that a novel, I just ruined the trying to get the poetry project candid thing, sorry. Can't catch me. In America, most people believe that a novel was just another word for book because the only books that ever existed in the English language were novels. If it wasn't a novel, we didn't know what it was because it certainly wasn't a book. Maybe it was a poem or a gardyloo. It was therefore not redundant but clarifying to return in kind, yes, a fictional novel. Though these words were never uttered without some sense of disbelief and thinly veiled contempt for the land in which I lived and contempt for the self that was so easily provoked. At the end of the party, when all the artists and curators were waiting the valets to bring back their cars before embarking on a long drive to a nondescript bar called Numbers, we heard a faint cry emerge from behind the arborvitae. A small gray animal helplessly stumbled before us. A kitten, so young. What should we do? He's too young to be alone. Where's his mother? It must be an orphan. Oh no, someone help. I witnessed a collective concern too disorganized to act toward a shared goal. Everyone was a little drunk and embarrassed. I started to see in this crisis about the animal something emerged. It had to do with class, where people came from, and all the while the kitten continued crying. Could it have been abandoned? We must get it to a shelter. Does anyone want a kitten? It's not a good idea to displace it. Then who is its owner? Maybe the neighbors know. It's a shame that there aren't enough resources available in this moment to actually figure this out. And I too became embarrassed. It was 10 o'clock, and the man who owned the home and had hosted the party seemed intent on ushering his guests out. "I'm a dog person," he announced, and promptly shut the door. The visiting artist, who had been held in customs for 36 hours prior to the opening, stared into the distance. I imagined the baffling impression the scene must have imparted as he compared this version of America to the ones he may have been warned of. I briefly entertained a fantasy of banding together with these people, most of them artists who I had met only 2 hours earlier, to solve this sad problem and also confront something about the way we live and the way we work. "We must do something," the curator begged while on her knees imploring someone brave among us to act. To hear that animal's cries pained me, and to observe the range of responses to the basest of needs, shelter, food, love, which included indifference, contempt, anxiety, and sorrow, had begun to color my impression of the evening and the world. I was not exempt. As I was experiencing this, I also knew I would commit this all to language later. To act upon a shared feeling, something like solidarity would have broken the spell. I did not believe myself capable of redirecting our collective energies that evening. To save that cat, did it even need saving, would not make us better people or more authentic artists. The following evening, I dreamt I was seated on a bench waiting for the train at the start of rush hour. I'm casually observing the other people on the platform. A man standing next to a small dog, a young woman wearing heels, another woman wearing a trench coat and shaking out a wet umbrella. Above ground, it had been raining. Then I hear a gasp. The woman in heels who had been standing near the edge of the platform had fainted, falling onto the tracks. No sooner do we register the reality of the situation when a train arrives, followed by a second gasp. I will myself, along with the others on the platform, to look away at the moment of impact. A sensation of stinging grief bears down upon me as I hear the train come to a sudden halt. I awake overwhelmed by the feeling of having arrived too late, and note the overlapping layers of denial I would need to sift through to better perceive what was at the core of these dreams and discern what I feared most, what I willed myself not to see, or what I imagined in lieu of sight. In my waking life, I habitually turned away from the more graphic spectrums of experience. I felt great enthusiasm in recreating them in the realms of art, but my capacity to bear difficulty in real life seemed underdeveloped. And I saw this would create problems for me in terms of participating in something resembling narrative. It was like running into a very obvious limit to my imagination and believing a very compelling story whose only essential purpose was to confirm not only that I was stupid, but that I was dull. I habitually thought about abruptly ending myself. What kind of counter-narrative do you need to write to imagine what you recognize as the wrong plot? I chose to redirect my attention to a series of disappeared thoughts, to follow the intricate diamond-shaped pattern found on the skins of newly hatched reticulated pythons. There's something unsettling about this line of inquiry, in those empty moments when I would experience myself participating in this thing that I often described as the real. I would invariably lose myself in the rhythmic lull of preparing dinner while wondering what are novels becoming now. I felt dizzy. The purple carrots were not through and through. In a state of hermitage, I considered once again the suggestion that as the narrator, I should let my characters do the suffering. This idea was not my own, though I thought of it often, particularly in those moments when I felt compelled to turn away from narration and instead, on behalf of the imagination, or more truthfully of a self-destructive impulse, pursue suffering. Why a person might be compelled to suffer is not the object of this writing, but one does wonder. And while I do not think I should suffer, if suffering is inevitable, maybe one ought to learn to enjoy it every now and again, infrequently and in measured doses. This pursuit, of course, presented something of a unique quandary, namely that to do this work, I cognitively split myself into some segmented worm and hoped that from this split a new self would emerge. I imagined all that I might do if I were to. The only place I considered one might take on such a ludicrous task in front of others in the name of some higher purpose was art. Within the realms of narrative, might there not exist a kind of secret back bar where a distorted psyche could bloom, free of the constraints that plagued other forms? I knew that it pleased me to see these spectacles in art, the suffering of others, perhaps because this represented something nebulous and constant that hovered like some permanent subsonic drone in the fringes of my imagination. But within this meandering moral plane emerged the prospect that I felt saddled with the fact of my being. I was not glad, nor was I convinced that to reside among the living was the best outcome, given the obvious alternatives. Perhaps, to put it simply, I wanted more from the world, and paradoxically, the only place I assumed I might find some sense of purpose was in passing through the veil to leave behind the real and become art. But you never did it just once. I kept rolling the rock up the hill. I'm still rolling the rock up the hill. It was really something to write that book. I had to discipline my brain to think in sentences. And it's not like I'd never written sentences before, but you know what it's like being a poet. But today got me thinking about this piece called Vermont Notebook. And so it's so funny that it should have come up already. It's coming up again. This is an older work from like 2019. Vermont Notebook. Mint, lovage, marjoram, chives. First day at Marble House. We have arrived, and I am overwhelmed by feelings of the sublime. In the words of the late poet John Ashbery, I get up, am exasperated, and sink back. The following day, eggs with some fresh sorrel salad on the side. We rode 2.4 miles to Dorset. One of the tires needed air. This was followed by lunch, squash kale farro salad. Then an essay by Marguerite Duras about Flaubert. For dinner, honey nut squash sage risotto. For dessert, the figure drawing book. You too can learn how to draw. Anna and Alyssa discuss the male model. Morant asks, is he wearing his girlfriend's underwear? No, it's called a jockstrap, whereas the female nude not depicted here at all. You'll just have to conjure her image for yourself, the shape of her bangs, her eyes, her palms. Before bed, I consider Thora Birch opposite Steve Buscemi in the movie Ghost World. The day before, Dutch pancakes. In the quarry, a wasp. Falling in and out of routine, sage, time, sorrel, sung. The rhythm I was beginning to establish while on the grounds was beginning to shift, no thanks to the couple I encountered in Dorset who felt a need to complain about Indigenous Peoples Day. Fucking liberals, the guy said. Fuck Columbus, I replied. I don't know what took hold of me, the wild grasses, the trees. It's not like me to talk out of turn. Maybe it's the fact that some people take up so much space, they're incapable of ever recognizing how much. But that day, I just needed to take up even more. Ugh, stupid Vermonters, fucking liberals, the guy sneered. He was in his 60s, but even as I write this, I am revising it, re-remembering it as I go along. Whereas he was mostly annoyed, I felt in contrast like a pest, a swarm, bothering him with my politics. But I'm not from Vermont, I declared. I'm from New York, bitch. You know where I put the emphasis. In John Ashbery's words, America is a fun country. Still, there are aspects of it which I would prefer not to think about. That night, it was my turn again to make dinner, blistered turnips, a mood. This morning, I still feel estranged. How did I get here? Am I, whether I like it or not, related to that man? And what about his wife, their kin? And what if I was? I imagined the only thing we had in common was the degree to which we suffered in order to stay young. The chicken is tender, I thought, though lacking in flavor, especially salt. I like the sensation of space, silence, dust. At the health food store, I buy milk thistle, toothpaste, candy, wine. Tomorrow, a group of us will go to acupuncture together and meet Mark. Ellen asks me if I miss Ernie. The uncomplicated answer would have been yes. Today, I am watching Douglas Sirk's magnificent Obsession. After 5+ years together, I am still obsessed. Time gets elastic. We are not the people we once were, says Céline in a French accent. I have some idea of who I was, but I am very confused about who I am and where I fit in. The old oppositions are always there. Do I live or do I write? In some other version of my life, I would have very much liked to be who I am, because when I was young, the room in which I worked was also the room in which I slept. Maybe if I'm awake, I should be writing. The following is a list of things I did instead. I walked into the garden. Then I walked to the consignment store. Eventually, I cut into a very well-done piece of pork, placed over some polenta, topped with some leek hairs and fresh herbs. I bought some end-of-season maple soft serve. I boiled many kettles of tea. I cooked a sweet potato sausage hash, and later a sauce of butternut squash enjoyed by all. This morning, I swept the floor. I listened to Morant talk about a dream and asked myself, did I not dream this same dream once? If this is not the work, then I don't know what is. The process was not unlike that of the pine needle fermented forest drink. It's not that I chose to do those things rather than to work. It's that eating is part of the work and so is missing. I think of my cat at home alone and the sensation of traffic slowing even as we are finally approaching. Then I looked at pictures of a dinner to which I had been disinvited. But maybe because the dinner was not as good as the one the night before or the one after, I didn't feel so excluded. Knowing you were missed, how could you feel left out? Tarragon, potato, sorrel, onion. I know what Morant means when she says all I think about all day is food. Had I planned this a little better, I would have researched Dorset beforehand, or even Vermont, and discovered earlier on John Ashbery and Joe Brainerd's Vermont Notebook, published in 1975 by Black Sparrow Press. How can I put what I am doing in conversation with other American traditions while also expanding upon those traditions? 61 degrees and cloudy. Why is that funny? I'm being real. The tension, 61 degrees and cloudy, the tension between doing and writing, being and living, always reveals itself. It's like sorrel soup today, sorrel sorbet tomorrow. Apart from some raw Brazil nuts, I have everything I desire because the arc of this line is us. Maybe it doesn't matter what we do with what we don't throw out. Maybe we are inside one another's lives in a way we can't control. Céline. No, the lion's mane was not what we thought. En route to Peru, I recall the wine we drank last night was orange. We soaked the peels in the blood of today. More chaga, more mint. At the traffic circle, time stops, and with my neck, I draw the alphabet. I'm going to close with a new unedited. I feel like there's like some people for whom they hear that and they're just very experienced with poetry readings and their heart sort of like drops or like, oh God. And other people who like, ooh, new things. I just feel like this is the risk that you have to accept as being an artist, to just show the thing that is like before it's actually the thing. And then everyone can reflect like so many decades later, like, wow, remember that? I don't know. I think I'm writing a novel in verse. What if nothing happens? What if nothing happens but time keeps passing and nothing happens? What if 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 time keeps happening 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 and nothing and no things? What if time keeps happening and nothing keeps? What if time keeps and time happens and nothing happens? Time is happening, nothing is happening, nothing is happening. Time is happening. Time is keeping. Timekeeping. Nothing is keeping. Nothing is happening. Happening inside. Happening. Nothing is happening. Nothing is happening. Nothing is happening. Keep nothing. Nothing is keeping time. Nothing keeps happening. Time is happening. Nothing keeps time. Time keeps happening. Nothing happens. Nothing happens. Time keeps happening. What if nothing keeps time from happening? What if nothing? What if nothing? What if nothing? What if time keeps happening? What if nothing keeps time from happening? What if nothing keeps? What if nothing keeps happening? What is happening is time. What keeps happening is time. What is happening? What is happening? What is happening inside time? Time is happening. Nothing keeps time from happening. What if nothing keeps time from happening? What if nothing keeps time from happening? What if nothing keeps time from happening? What keeps happening? What keeps happening? What if time? What keeps happening? What if time? What if time is what keeps happening? What if time is? What if time was? What if time was keeping something from happening? What if time is keeping something from happening? What if time was? What if time was keeping something from happening? What is time? Is time keeping something from happening? What is time? What is time keeping from happening? What is time keeping from happening? What is time keeping from happening? Time is keeping us from happening. Time is keeping time. Time is time. Time is time. Time is time. Time is keeping. What's happening? I keep time from happening. What's happening? What's keeping time from happening? What is keeping time from happening? What is keeping time from happening? What is keeping time from happening? Time is happening. Time is happening. It's keeping time. It's keeping time from happening. Time is. Time is keeping time. Time is happening. Time keeps happening. Time is. Why is time? Why is time happening? Why is time? What keeps happening? What is happening? Why is time happening? Time is. Time keeps happening. What if this is a story about a person who loses her watch and loses track of time for days on end and keeps losing track of it? She regarded the clocks. Thank you.
Thank you so much to both of you. I felt like we went on a journey between like prose and poetry, and time kind of stretched, and there's such a kind of deep silence in the room as well. I don't know if other people heard it, but like it makes the absorption of the experience really real and durational, to borrow your word, Lara. Okay, thank you for coming. Thank you, Matt, for your beautiful intro. I also want to thank Noah, who's working sound tonight, Gary at videography, Heather at staff support, as well as all the volunteers. And thank you all for coming to the Poetry Project. Oh yeah, and buy books, buy many, many books.